The golden invitation. Julian Reed adjusted his onyx cufflinks as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in his penthouse. At 36, he had achieved what most only dreamed of, founding a cybersecurity firm that revolutionized data protection and selling it for 9 figures. The reflection staring back at him showed a man of confidence. With sharp features framed by dark hair, threaded with distinguished silver at the temples. "You look perfect," came a melodic voice from behind him. Julian turned to see Vanessa Pierce emerging from the bedroom, draped in a crimson gown that complemented her warm brown skin and cascading black curls. They had been dating for 3 months after meeting at a tech conference in Singapore, where she had impressed him with her knowledge of quantum computing. "Not as perfect as you," he replied, taking her hand. "Ready for your first Preston Foundation gala?" Vanessa smiled, a hint of nervousness in her eyes.
Ow.
"A room full of billionaires and celebrities? I've given TED Talks to smaller crowds than this." Julian laughed, retrieving the embossed invitation from his desk. The Preston Foundation was the most prestigious charity in the city, and their annual gala attracted the elite from around the world. This year was Julian's first time attending a personal invitation from Thomas Preston himself. The aging philanthropist who had taken an interest in Julian's rags-to-riches story. "Just remember," Julian said, slipping the invitation into his jacket pocket, "most of them are just ordinary people with extraordinary bank accounts." As they descended in the private elevator to the waiting Bentley, Julian's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Benedict. "Everything's set for tonight. Driver ready. Table arranged. FYI, Preston Foundation announcing their new director. Tonight, big reveal planned." Julian showed the message to Vanessa. "Looks like we're in for some excitement." The drive to the Grand Meridian Hotel was quick, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. Julian found himself lost in thought, reflecting on how far he'd come from the small apartment he grew up in with his grandmother. He had fought for every opportunity, clawed his way up from nothing. "What are you thinking about?" Vanessa asked, squeezing his hand. "Just how lucky I am," he replied, though in truth luck had little to do with his success. As they pulled up to the red carpet, camera flashes illuminated the night. Julian stepped out first, then offered his hand to Vanessa, who emerged with the grace of someone born for the spotlight. Together they walked the gauntlet of photographers and reporters. "Mr. Reed, who's your date tonight?" called one journalist. "This is Dr. Vanessa Pierce, quantum physicist and the most brilliant mind in the room," Julian answered proudly. Entered the grand ballroom. Space transformed into an enchanted garden with cascading white orchids and crystal fixtures that caught the light like stars. The city's elite mingled over champagne and awe, d'oeuvres that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Julian Reed. Thomas Preston himself approached, a dignified man in his 70s. "I'm delighted you could make it. And this must be the brilliant Dr. Pierce I've heard about." As they exchanged pleasantries, Julian couldn't help but notice. Thomas seemed particularly excited about something. "You're in for quite a surprise tonight," the older man said with a twinkle in his eye. "Our new director has transformed our international initiatives completely. She's revolutionized how we approach humanitarian aid." "She sounds impressive," Julian replied. Thomas nodded. "Oh, she is. In fact, I believe you might already know her." Before Julian could inquire further, the lights dimmed and a spotlight hit the stage. Thomas excused himself to prepare for the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the voice over the sound system, "please welcome the new executive director of the Preston Foundation." Julian reached for his champagne, completely unprepared for the name that followed. "Ghosts from the past, ... Olivia Martinez." Julian froze, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. The name hit him like a physical blow, reverberating through his chest and stealing his breath. Around him the crowd erupted in applause, but the sound seemed distant, muffled by the sudden rushing in his ears. A slender woman in a midnight blue gown stepped onto the stage. Her confident stride and graceful posture immediately recognizable to Julian even after 5 years. Olivia's chestnut hair was shorter now, styled in an elegant bob that framed her face, Her olive skin glowed under the spotlight as she approached the microphone with a warm, practiced smile. "Thank you, Thomas, for that generous introduction," she began, her voice still carrying that slight accent Julian once found so enchanting. "And thank you all for supporting the Preston Foundation's mission to create sustainable change worldwide." Vanessa leaned close to Julian. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Something like that, he managed to reply, unable to tear his eyes from the stage. Olivia continued her speech, outlining her vision for the Foundation's future innovative micro-lending programs, educational initiatives in developing countries, and breakthrough medical outreach. Her passion was evident in every word, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. "We don't just want to provide aid," she emphasized. "We want to empower communities to build their own futures." Julian barely registered Vanessa's questioning glance. His mind was 5 years in the past, in a small apartment in Buenos Aires where he and Olivia had spent a year together. Back then, he was still building his company, working 18-hour days while she completed her master's in international development. They had been young, ambitious, and madly in love until everything fell apart. As Olivia concluded her speech, to thunderous applause, Julian finally set down his untouched champagne. The room felt too warm, too crowded. He loosened his tie slightly, trying to regain his composure. "Julian," Vanessa whispered, concern etching her features, "who is she to you?" Before he could answer, Thomas Preston appeared at their table again, beaming with pride. "Isn't she remarkable? Olivia has done incredible work with refugee communities across 3 continents. When our previous director retired, she was the obvious choice." Julian forced a smile. She always was dedicated to making a difference. Thomas's eyebrows rose with interest. "Ah, so you do know her? I thought you might. The humanitarian world is small, after all. We crossed paths years ago," Julian said carefully. "Wonderful. Then you must come say hello. She's just finishing up with the board members now." Panic flashed through Julian. "Actually, Thomas, I insist. Come, both of you." The elderly philanthropist was already guiding them through the crowd. Vanessa shot Julian a look that clearly demanded answers, but there was no time to explain. They were approaching a small group surrounding Olivia, who was animatedly discussing something with an older woman in an emerald dress. "Olivia, my dear," Thomas called. "There's someone here I'd like you to reconnect with." She turned, her smile professional and warm until her eyes met Julian's. For a brief moment, her composure faltered. Julian saw the flash of recognition, followed by something deeper, more complex in those dark eyes he once knew so well. "Julian," she breathed, recovering quickly. "What a surprise." "Congratulations on your appointment," he replied formally, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is Dr. Vanessa Pierce." Olivia extended her hand to Vanessa. "A pleasure to meet you, Dr. Pierce." "Likewise," Vanessa responded, her tone carefully neutral as she studied the woman before her. "Your speech was quite inspiring." An awkward silence fell over the group until Thomas, oblivious to the tension, exclaimed, "Isn't this wonderful? Old friends reuniting." "Julian here has done quite well for himself too, Olivia. His cybersecurity firm made quite a splash in the tech world." "Yes, I read about that," Olivia said softly. "Congratulations, Julian." Their eyes met again, and in that moment, the ballroom with all its glittering guests seemed to fade away. Between them hung 5 years of silence, of questions unanswered and words unsaid. It was Vanessa who broke the spell. I'd love to hear more about your international initiatives, Ms. Martinez." "Julian mentioned you were always passionate about humanitarian work." Olivia's gaze lingered on Julian for a moment longer before shifting to Vanessa. "Of course, and please, call me Olivia." As the women began to talk, Julian caught sight of a familiar figure watching them from across the room, Dominic Vega, Olivia's former roommate and closest friend. Dominic raised his glass in Julian's direction, his expression unreadable. The past, it seemed, wasn't finished with Julian Reed yet. Cross paths, the charity auction was in full swing, with a Picasso sketch commanding bids that made even the wealthiest guests raise their eyebrows. Julian sat stiffly at his table, barely listening to the auctioneer's rapid-fire cadence. Attention kept drifting to where Olivia stood, chatting with potential donors, effortlessly charming them with her genuine enthusiasm for the foundation's work. "You still haven't told me who she is," Vanessa said quietly, her fingers wrapped around her wine stem. Her voice was calm, but Julian detected the edge beneath it. "We were engaged," he finally admitted, turning to face her. 5 years ago?" Composed expression flickered briefly. "I see, and this didn't seem worth mentioning when we walked in." "I had no idea she would be here," Julian replied. "We haven't spoken since the breakup." Before Vanessa could respond, Dominic Vega appeared beside their table, his tailored suit and slick-back hair giving him the appearance of a modern-day aristocrat. "Julian Reed," he said, his Spanish accent still pronounced despite years in the States, looking prosperous as ever. Julian stood to shake his hand. "Dominic, it's been a while." 5 years, 2 months, Dominic replied with precision. "May I?" He gestured to an empty chair. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably as Dominic settled beside them, signaling a waiter for a drink. "So you're still Olivia's right hand," Julian observed. Dominic smiled thinly. "I'm the Foundation's CFO now. You're still watching." "Out for her interests?" "Yes." He turned to Vanessa, extending his hand. "Dominic Vega. And you must be the quantum physicist everyone is talking about." "Word travels fast," Vanessa remarked. "In these circles, like wildfire?" Dominic took a sip of his newly arrived whiskey. Julian always did have excellent taste in brilliant women. The implication hung heavy in the air. Julian felt a surge of irritation at Dominic's typical boundary pushing. "How did you two end up at the Preston Foundation?" Julian asked, steering the conversation away from dangerous waters. "After Buenos Aires, Olivia ran refugee resettlement programs in Jordan," Dominic explained. "Her work caught Thomas's attention. He recruited her to revamp their international division last year." He studied Julian over his glass. "And now she's running the whole operation?" Julian nodded, genuinely impressed, despite himself. "She always was meant for important work, unlike some who were meant for important bank accounts." Dominic replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Vanessa tensed beside Julian, but before he could respond, the auction concluded and the band struck up a waltz. Couples began filling the dance floor. "If you'll excuse me," Dominic said, standing, "duty calls." He moved away, heading straight for Olivia. Julian watched as Dominic whispered something in Olivia's ear that made her glance in their direction. She nodded, then approached their table with measured steps. "Julian," she said, her voice professional but with an undercurrent of hesitation, "may I borrow you for a moment? There's a potential donor interested in cybersecurity initiatives for developing nations." "Of course," Julian replied, looking to Vanessa. "Will you be all right?" "Perfectly," Vanessa assured him, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh." Get better acquainted with the Preston Foundation's mission statement. As Julian followed Olivia through the crowd, he sensed this was no donor meeting. She led him to a quiet balcony overlooking the city, the spring air cool against his face. "After the warmth of the ballroom, there's no donor, is there?" he asked once they were alone. Olivia turned to face him, the city lights illuminating half her face while casting the other in shadow. "No, I thought we should talk without an audience." They stood in silence for a moment, 5 years of distance, stretching between them like an ocean. "You look well, Olivia," Julian finally said. "So, do you." She leaned against the balcony rail. "Your company was quite a success story. Not surprised. And you're changing the world, just like you always planned." A small smile touched her lips. "Not quite the way I planned." The weight of unspoken words hung between them. Julian thought of their last night together in Buenos Aires, the terrible fight, the ultimatum, the door slamming as he left. The time he'd return the next morning, ready to compromise, she was gone. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" he asked, the question that had haunted him for years finally escaping. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. "Is that what you think happened?" Before she could elaborate, the balcony door opened. Vanessa stood there, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but Thomas is looking for both of you. They're about to announce the fundraising total." Julian noticed how Olivia straightened, immediately shifting back into her professional persona. Of course, we should head back inside. As they returned to the ballroom, Julian felt the conversation slipping away like water through his fingers. Vanessa's hand found his, squeezing perhaps a bit too tightly. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly, as Julian replied automatically, though nothing felt all right at all. The past he thought he'd left behind had suddenly crashed into his present, raising questions he'd long buried. Across the room, Dominic was watching them, his dark eyes calculating as he whispered something to an elegant older woman Julian didn't recognize. The woman's gaze sharpened on Julian, her expression one of immediate dislike. "Who is that, with Dominic?" Julian asked Vanessa. "Eleanor Martinez," Vanessa replied. "Olivia's mother. I met her during the auction." She paused. "She asked quite a few questions about you." Julian felt a chill run down his spine. Eleanor Martinez had never approved of him, convinced he would hold her daughter back from her potential. And now, as Eleanor's cold gaze met his across the crowded room, Julian realized some resentments never faded with time. Asterisk. Revelations under chandeliers. The fundraising total was announced to enthusiastic applause: $52 million for global education initiatives. As glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, Julian found himself trapped in a conversation with a tech investor, his mind elsewhere. Across the room, Olivia was speaking with her mother. Eleanor's rigid posture and quick gestures suggesting an intense discussion. "Excuse me," Julian said to the investor, spotting Vanessa returning from the ladies' room. He made his way to her side, grateful for an anchor in the increasingly turbulent evening. "Having fun?" he asked, attempting lightness. Vanessa gave him a measured look. "Actually, I had an interesting conversation with Dominic in the hallway. He mentioned something about Buenos Aires in a letter." Julian stiffened. "What letter? You seem surprised you didn't know about it." Vanessa studied his reaction. "Julian, what really happened between you and Olivia?" Before he could answer, the crowd parted, and Eleanor Martinez appeared before them. Elegant in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and the same determined eyes as her daughter. "Julian Reed," she said, her voice crisp as autumn leaves, "still causing disruption wherever you go, I see." Julian straightened. "Mrs. Martinez, it's been a long time, not long enough." Her gaze shifted to Vanessa. "Dr. Pierce, I apologize for interrupting, but I believe I should clarify something for you. Your ... companion here nearly destroyed my daughter's career before it began." "Mother?" Olivia appeared beside Eleanor, her expression mortified. "Is neither the time nor place. When is the right time to discuss how he abandoned you in a foreign country when you refused to give up your fellowship?" Eleanor countered. Julian's face darkened. "That's not what happened." "No." Eleanor's eyebrow arched. "Ah. You gave her an ultimatum: follow you to Silicon Valley or end the engagement. When she chose her career, you walked out, came back." "Next morning," Julian said, his voice low and tight. "She was already gone. Because I convinced her it was for the best," Eleanor admitted without remorse. "You would have held her back with your selfish demands and startup dreams." Olivia stepped between them. "Enough. You had no right to make that decision, Mother." She turned to Julian, her eyes pained. "I left you a letter explaining everything. I slipped it under your hotel room door that morning." Julian shook his head slowly. "There was no letter, Olivia." Dominic appeared at Eleanor's side, his expression grim. "Actually, there was. I saw her write it," glanced at Eleanor, something unspoken passing between them. A heavy silence fell as understanding dawned on Julian. "You intercepted it," he said to Eleanor, pieces finally clicking into place. "You never gave me her letter." Eleanor lifted her chin. "I did what was necessary." Olivia had a brilliant future ahead of her. The foundation she's built, the lives she's changed, none of that would have happened if she'd followed you to California. To play startup wife? "That wasn't your choice to make," Olivia said, her voice shaking with carefully controlled anger. "What did the letter say?" Julian asked, his eyes never leaving Olivia's face. She hesitated, aware of the growing audience around them. "It said I needed time, not that I was ending things. I asked you to give me 6 months to complete my fellowship, and then I'd join you." Her voice softened. I said, I loved you too much to make you choose between me and your dreams. Felt the ground shift beneath him. 5 years of believing she'd chosen her career over their relationship. 5 years of building walls around his heart, all based on a lie. I thought you left without a word, he said quietly. I thought our relationship meant nothing to you. And I thought you never responded because your ultimatum was real, Olivia replied. That you truly wouldn't wait for me. Step back, the realization of what she'd walked into evident on her face. I should give you both some space. Vanessa, wait, Julian began, but she shook her head. It's all right, Julian. Some conversations need to happen. With dignity, she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Eleanor watched this exchange with sharp eyes. Well, it seems history repeats itself. Another brilliant woman walks away from Julian Reed. That's enough, Mother, Olivia said firmly. You've done enough damage. She turned to Dominic. Did you know about this? Dominic shifted uncomfortably. I suspected, but I wasn't certain until tonight. When Julian mentioned never receiving a letter, I knew. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, collecting herself. When she opened them, she addressed her mother with quiet authority. We'll discuss this tomorrow, Mother. For now, I have guests to attend to. Eleanor's lips thinned, but she nodded curtly and moved away, Dominic following after a last apologetic glance at Olivia, left alone. Julian and Olivia stood in charged silence, the revelation hanging between them like a thundercloud. 5 years, Julian finally said. 5 years thinking you didn't care enough to say goodbye? 5 years thinking you couldn't wait 6 months for me? Olivia countered softly. Around them, the gala continued. Champagne flowed, music played. Donations were pledged, but they remained in their own bubble of belated truth. The past they thought they knew had been rewritten in an instant, leaving both of them adrift in possibilities of what might have been. What happens now? Julian asked, the question hanging in the air between them. Olivia glanced in the direction Vanessa had gone, then back to Julian. I don't know, she answered honestly. But I think we both have some decisions to make. New beginnings. The gala was winding down, the crowd thinning as midnight approached. Julian stood by the tall windows overlooking the city, nursing a glass of water. The revelations of the evening had left him with a clarity that alcohol would only muddle. He spotted Vanessa across the room, deep in conversation with a renowned physicist. She caught his eye briefly and offered a small, sad smile before returning to her discussion. In that simple gesture, Julian read, understanding and farewell. She seems remarkable. Olivia's voice came from beside him. She had changed from her formal gown into a simpler cocktail dress, looking more like the woman he remembered from their shared past. She is, Julian agreed, turning to face her. I should go talk to her. Yes, you should. Olivia nodded, her expression gentle. But first I wanted to give you something. From her clutch, she withdrew a folded, yellowed piece of paper. I kept a copy. All these years. Sometimes I would read it and wonder if things might have been different. Julian took the letter with careful fingers, as if handling a fragile artifact from a lost civilization. In a way, it was exactly that, a relic from a life that had splintered into 2 separate paths 5 years ago. Thank you, he said quietly, placing it in his jacket pocket without reading it. Some things were better experienced in private. They stood together in companionable silence, each watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. Do you ever think about what might have happened? Julian finally asked. If I had received your letter? If you had received my calls? Olivia considered this, her profile thoughtful in the dim light. Sometimes. But then I remember where those separate paths led us. She gestured to the ballroom. You built something remarkable, Julian. So did I. Perhaps we needed to walk those paths alone to become who we were meant to be. Wise as always, Julian said with a soft laugh. I've missed that about you. I've missed your determination, she replied. The way you never backed down from a challenge. The weight of 5 years of misunderstanding was lifting. not erasing the past, but transforming it into something they could both carry more lightly. Your mother was wrong about one thing, Julian said. I wouldn't have held you back. I would have supported your dreams, just as I hope you would have supported mine. I know that now, Olivia acknowledged. And I think deep down, she knows it too. She's just never been good at admitting mistakes. Julian smiled wryly. Stubbornness. Runs in the family, as I recall. This earned him a genuine laugh from Olivia, the sound achingly familiar. Some things never change. Across the room, Julian saw Vanessa gathering her wrap, preparing to leave. I should go, he said, a new urgency in his voice. Olivia nodded. Understanding, go. Julian started to walk away, then paused, turning back. Olivia, would you have coffee with me sometime? To revisit the past, but perhaps to see if we can be friends in the present. I'd like that, she replied with a smile that held both closure and possibility. Julian made his way through the remaining guests, catching up with Vanessa just as she reached the grand entrance. Leaving without saying goodbye? He asked gently. Vanessa turned, her expression composed, though her eyes held a hint of sadness. I thought it might be easier. Nothing about tonight has been easy, Julian admitted. May I walk you out? Outside, the spring night was cool and clear. They stood on the steps of the hotel as the valet brought Vanessa's car around. I'm sorry. About tonight, Julian said. You deserved better than being caught in the crossfire of my past. Vanessa studied him thoughtfully. Don't apologize. I'm not angry, Julian, but I am observant. She reached up to straighten his tie in a gesture of affection tinged with finality. I saw your face when you realized what happened between you two. Some doors aren't meant to stay closed, Vanessa. She shook her head, stopping him. A good few months? I don't regret a minute. Her car arrived, and she accepted her keys from the valet. Call me in a few weeks, when you've sorted things out. Not as a romantic prospect, but I'd hate to lose you as a friend. Julian nodded, respecting her clarity. I'd like that. They embraced briefly before she slipped into her car and drove away, leaving Julian alone on the steps of the Grand Meridian. He didn't return to the gala. Instead, he dismissed his driver and decided to walk, needing time with his thoughts. In the quiet of his apartment later that night, Julian finally unfolded Olivia's letter. The paper was fragile with age, the ink slightly faded, but her handwriting was as he remembered, precise yet flowing, much like the woman herself. The words she had written 5 years ago washed over him, not as a path to what might have been, but as a bridge to understanding. By the time he finished reading, Julian felt something shift within him, not the reopening of an old wound, but the final healing of it. He took out his phone and composed a simple message to Olivia. Coffee next week? I know a place with an excellent view of the stars. In her own apartment across town, Olivia had just finished a difficult conversation with her mother. Eleanor had finally acknowledged her interference, though she stopped short of an apology. As mother and daughter reached a fragile new understanding, Olivia's phone chimed with Julian's message. She smiled, typing back, I'd like that. Some views are worth waiting for. In a single evening, 3 lives had converged and then gently disentangled. Vanessa drove toward her future with clear-eyed determination. Eleanor returned home with the realization that her daughter had outgrown her protection. Dominic poured himself a nightcap, relieved that an old weight had been lifted, and Julian and Olivia, separated by 5 years of misunderstanding, found themselves at the beginning of something new, not a return to what was lost, but the discovery of who they had become in the time apart. Sometimes, Julian reflected as he gazed out. At the city lights, the most unexpected reunions offered the most beautiful new beginnings.